catch him when he's just about to hit the water, and one more time I say, John, you've got to listen to me. You could get hurt. Eventually, the path is going to get much more treacherous. You know, I want John to understand. Each year goes by, that path gets a little more challenging. At 18, the path looks very different than it looks at 8. So I want John to really get this. So I give him my lecture again. How many days, how many times could I catch John before he's going to get it? How many times could I do this? 1,000,000. Why? Because I think I'm the teacher here, right? I think this is going to teach John something. Who's the real teacher in this situation? John's going to learn, but what's going to teach John? Right, the experience of hitting that ground is what John really needs. Now, the good news, see, is when John is learning, he's only about this far from the ground, right? So he learns all those critical lessons when he can fall, and he goes, doom, and that's it. And he's over it. I'm thinking I'm protecting John. I'm thinking that somehow this is going to prepare him for what he needs for life. And in reality, what I'm doing is I'm disabling John. I am teaching him about a false reality. Unless, by the way, you guys have somebody who comes around every day and catches you every time you make a mistake. You know, you didn't pay attention to that checkbook, and somebody says, oh, here's a few extra bucks to cover that check. Or, you know, you get ready to bump into somebody's car because you're not paying attention, and somebody comes along like, I don't know, this is not reality, right? So the goal here is to really see that most of your actions that have to do with protecting John from the age-appropriate developmental challenges of his time, most of those actions are going to disable John because it gets in the way of reality. Reality is what John needs. John needs to understand that there's a relationship between paying attention and the consequences that come with not paying attention. Does that make sense? Here's a common story I'll get. It's 7:15 in the morning. John's sitting around the table. He says, oh, Mom, I forgot about that science project that I got to get finished up. I only need a few more minutes, but I need your help. So Mom pauses. She gets on the cell phone. She lets them know they're going to be late for work. She clears the table in a mad rush. Out comes the science project. Suddenly, in a wild rush, in the next half hour, 45 minutes, things get pulled together. She drives John to school, writes an excuse for John. John gets an A on his science project. Helping John or hindering John? Now, this could play out dozens and dozens of times in dozens of different ways, right? If we think that John's going to really get it by protecting John from those consequences of his choices, then we're really mistaken. And some of you have 10-year-olds, some of you have 12-year-olds, some of you have 16-year-olds where you can see that really unfolding, right? Where you look back and you go, oh, yep, protect it, protect it, protect it, protect it. And see, there wouldn't be a problem with that if you were getting in the way, if you weren't, let's change that. There wouldn't be a problem if you weren't trying to bend the laws of reality. Because the laws of reality are really what you want to prepare your kids for, right? You want them to be prepared for the way it really works out there, not for some false illusion of the way it works. Does that make sense? If I think that there are no consequences for my choices, then I'm going to end up moving into the world in a way that becomes very dangerous, and it just doesn't serve me very well. I can think of situations you guys can remember locally here, some of the decisions that have been made at times, particularly in the world of athletics. Sometimes you'll see that there will be a team that's a state quality championship team, and the team members go out and they do something utterly stupid. Maybe they break the law, maybe they do something that really should mean that they don't participate in the team, but because they're getting ready to play in the championship, what happens? It's okay. Like, what are kids learning there? What are we teaching in those situations? To me, it's probably one of the most dangerous things that we can do is if we think that somehow protecting kids from the consequences of their choices that we're going to help them, because we don't. Keep in mind, however, I just want to remind you that as John is walking along this path, or as we are walking with him, that I'm not talking about stupid decisions. If John is getting ready to run in the street, of course you stop John from running in the street, right? We're talking about the 99.9% of John's decisions where choice and consequence, and he needs to learn that critical relationship. So protection is not preparation. In fact, it disables kids because you see it over and over and over and over. It is so tough to learn something later in life that you didn't get by experience. See, it's kind of like this. When kids are young, choice and consequence are right close together, right? As we get older, choice and consequence gets further and further spread apart. We can understand that, but the learning that makes it so that it's in our system, all that comes when kids are really early in life, when kids are young in life. And so key piece here is to make sure that your kids make choices and that those choices come with consequences, and don't get in the way of that. If that means a little sadness, if it means a few tears, if it means a little upset, if it means they're angry at you because you didn't bring them their soccer shoes after you've done that 24 times and they don't get to play in the soccer game, that needs to be the teaching lesson. I mean, just watch what happens. If you always bring the soccer shoes, will they ever remember to bring the soccer shoes? If you don't bring the soccer shoes, how many times will it take before they remember the soccer shoes? 2, 3 times. Right. She's been there. 3 times it took. So, protection is not preparation. Preparation is thinking reality. What will reality do? And I'll tell you, one of the best rules of thumb you can keep in mind long after we're done here, you know, over the years, is you just want to think ahead. Jump ahead to reality. Jump ahead when you're not going to be there, and think about what to do based upon that criteria. And you'll almost always be on track. Almost always you'll be on track. So much of what guides my thought process in terms of what to do with kids is treating them as if they're competent and capable of handling reality, which, by the way, they are, right? So, reality rules. Just remember that. That's the key piece here. Just stay focused and make sure that reality comes with consequences. Third mistake that we make is probably best exemplified by a young man I interviewed a year ago in August. We'll call him Austin. And Austin came to my office in the middle of August for an evaluation. And his parents brought him in because he had been in an accident a couple of years before and was now 12 years old. He was in middle school. He was flunking previous year had flunked every single subject, was falling asleep on his desk. And the parents were involved in a lawsuit, and they believed that their son had been injured and that his deterioration was due to this injury that had occurred several years ago. Well, I had a ton of medical records that I was looking through and so forth, and the injury, based upon the description and his symptoms afterwards, just did not appear to be that severe. But I was involved in this evaluation, so Austin comes in, and we have a 9 o'clock appointment in the morning, and his dad brings him in. And so I interview the dad for just a few minutes, about a half hour before, and Dad seemed like a pretty normal guy. Austin comes in, again, 12, going on 13, 9:30 in the morning, sits down in my office, we start chatting, and you know, as he's sitting there, you can just see his head's nodding, and his eyes are going closed, and he just looks like he's falling asleep. And I said, Austin, are you okay? And he goes, yeah, I'm tired. I said, what time did you go to bed? He kind of looks at me and he goes, 6:30. I said, 6:30 this morning? He goes, yeah, 6:30 this morning. I said, well, what were you doing all night? I was playing video games with my buddies online. So how often do you do this? Every night? I mean, do you stay up? He goes, well, usually between 5:30. As soon as the sun comes up, we start to call it quits. So I said, is this the way it is during the school year? And Austin says, no, I usually stop by about 2:30. So needless to say, Austin did not have a brain injury. His father, however, I have questions about, you know. Because when I asked his dad, I said, do you know what time your son went to bed last night? And he goes, no, not really. I know that he went down to his room. Now they put a room in the basement for their son, 12 years old. So he said, I know he went down about 8 o'clock. That was the extent of what he knew about his son's behavior over the course of the evening. I said, well, do you have any idea what time your son goes to bed when he's in school? He goes, no, he usually goes down around 8 o'clock. I said, well, he tells me he's playing video games with his buddies until about 2:30 or 3 in the morning. He goes, yeah, he's talked about it before, but all his friends do that. All of his buddies are up doing that. I said, what do you mean all of his buddies, 12 years old? And he said, well, he tends to hang out with kids that are older. Some of them are 16, 17, 18. I said, yeah. In fact, Austin said all of his buddies have dropped out of school. And they're at home playing video games till 6 in the morning. And this is who Dad is letting his son play video games with all night. Point being that as I talk to Dad about this, he's kind of looking at me like, but all kids are doing this, aren't they? And I'm going, no, not all kids are doing this, but there are a lot of kids who are doing this. There are a lot of kids who, as a main diet, eat McDonald's French fries and chicken McNuggets as their main food, right? You guys may have seen the statistics came out a couple years ago, but childhood obesity doubled in 15 years. It's an unheard of statistic. There's never before has anything like that happened in history. Childhood obesity doubled in 15 years. Now, what that means for us, what it means for you guys, is that the health care, what that's going to do to your children's future, in terms of how it affects them, what their life is going to be like, is one thing. But in terms of the demands upon health care, it's another. In terms of the quality of life, it's still another. But that's primarily a function of most of us being willing, not most of us, but a good percentage of us being willing to follow the crowd as a compass for staying on track. The kids are all in the van after the soccer game. Where do they want to go? They want to go to McDonald's, right? I mean, that's where most of them want to go. So you have to be careful about whether or not that really makes sense. What's the choice that makes sense here? And so, any of you remember a fellow by the name of Earl Nightingale? He was a kind of a philosopher and one of the first people to make motivational recordings. As a matter of fact, he had the first motivational record ever produced in 1933, and it was called, I think the name of it was You Become What You Think About Most. But one of Earl Nightingale's points was this. He said, basically, if you look at what most people are doing and where most people end up, he says, you'll see that most folks, when they get later in life, they're really not that happy with their life. They're not that happy with their savings account. They're not that happy with their environment. Some are, but most aren't. And so he had this thing. He said, if you want to figure out what to do in life, look at what everybody else is doing and just go the opposite way. You'll be closer. There's no guarantee, and he made that point. There's no guarantee, but you'd be closer if you stayed away from all the places where most kids want to eat, right? You'd be closer to being on track if, let's take what most kids want to watch. And again, this may not be your children, right? Because you may have taught them, you may have modeled something different. But what do most kids want to watch on TV? What do most kids want to listen to? If we take that as a group and we said, okay, we're just going to go in the opposite direction, I think we'd all end up in a better place, right? So just keep this in mind. You wouldn't want to use me, to be quite honest. You wouldn't want to use what everybody else is doing. You kind of have to turn to your own values. What makes sense to you? What is it that's important to you? If inside, and this is the best way to determine, if inside you're looking at a choice for your child, they want you to buy a toy, they want you to buy a CD, they want a video game, and you look at that and your gut kind of goes, pay attention to that. That's your values speaking to you. And if you just pay attention to that, then you're going to be much closer